fat girl left for dead. After losing her legs, only the most feared mountain man refused to leave her. The storm howled across the Colorado Ridge, driving snow like knives into the night. Beneath the overturned wagon, a young woman lay pinned, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her name was Aaliyah Carter, 22 years old, soft-bodied and broad-hipped, the kind of girl her kin had long mocked as slow and useless. Now, as wolves circled in the shadows, those very kin had abandoned her, stealing what little remained of her father's goods and leaving her to die. Her legs were trapped beneath the splintered axle. She could feel the numbness creeping up from her toes, each minute colder, heavier. Voices still echoed in her head, the last words her cousin spat before disappearing into the blizzard. "She'll only slow us down. Let the fatso feed the wolves." Tears froze against her cheeks. She clawed at the snow, desperate, her voice breaking as she cried out into the storm, "Please, somebody help me." What answered was not mercy from the heavens, but the crunch of boots, slow, deliberate, cutting through the gale. A figure emerged from the blizzard, tall as a pine and broad as the cabin doors of old. His beard was thick, his shoulders draped in a wolfskin cloak, his eyes like chips of flint catching firelight. Ryan Cutter. The name alone carried whispers through every mining camp and frontier town. Some called him a deserter, others a butcher, still others the most dangerous man the Rockies had ever bred. But in that moment, he was not a rumor. He was a towering presence, standing over her broken body. He looked down, snow collecting in his hair, and rumbled in a voice as steady as bedrock. "You're not dying here. Not tonight." The blizzard swallowed all sound except the rasp of Aaliyah's breathing. Ryan crouched, bracing his scarred hands beneath the wagon's axle. With a guttural roar, he heaved the timber just high enough to drag her clear. Her scream tore through the night as blood gushed from her crushed legs. He didn't flinch. He had seen worse on battlefields where cannons split men in two. Lifting her as though she were weightless, Ryan trudged through snow that swallowed his boots, his long strides never faltering. Behind him, wolves howled at the scent of blood. Ahead, through the storm, a dim glow flickered. The lone cabin he had built with his own hands, after he had sworn never again to live among men. Inside, the air was sharp with pine smoke. He laid her on his bed, his eyes raking over the mangled limbs. He knew the truth before he spoke it. "If I don't cut them off," he said, voice flat, "you'll die before morning." Aaliyah's eyes widened with terror. "No, please, I can't." "You want to live?" His gaze burned into hers, unyielding. "Then trust me." She turned her face away, tears spilling, but she gave the smallest nod. Ryan moved quickly. He stoked the fire until the iron blade of his hunting knife glowed red, then laid out strips of leather for her to bite. He ground herbs into a bitter paste, forcing it between her lips to dull the pain. When the knife fell, her scream ripped through the cabin, raw and ragged. He worked without hesitation, cauterizing the wounds, binding them tight with linen he tore from his own shirt. By the time he finished, sweat ran down his back, and her skin gleamed pale as ivory against the quilts. She hovered between life and death for 3 days. Fever gripped her, twisting her dreams into nightmares. Voices of her kin laughing, jeering, calling her useless. Each time she thrashed, Ryan's heavy hand pressed her down, his voice gravel yet steady. "Easy now, you're safe." When the fever broke, dawn light streamed through the window. Aaliyah opened her eyes to find him beside the bed, Bible open in his massive hands. His lips moved soundlessly over the verses, the cadence steady as a prayer. Her throat ached as she whispered, Why would you save me?" He closed the book, meeting her gaze. "Because no one deserves to be left for the wolves, not even me." In that moment, Aaliyah saw through the hardened shell of the man they called a monster. His face was carved by loss, his eyes shadowed by things unsaid. But in his care, she felt the first flicker of worth her family had never given her. For the first time since the wagon overturned, she allowed herself to believe she might live. The storm passed, leaving the mountains glazed in ice and silence. Days blurred together inside Ryan's cabin, each one a battle between Aaliyah's will to live and the raw pain that tore through her body. Ryan moved like a man with iron carved into his bones, hauling water from the creek, crushing herbs, changing her bandages with hands that were rough but never careless. She watched him through half-lidded eyes, sometimes wishing he would speak, sometimes grateful for the quiet. When she could finally sit up without swooning, he came to her side carrying 2 long poles of sanded pine. "Crutches," he said simply. "Made them to fit your arms." Her heart lurched. "You? You expect me to walk again?" His gaze was steady. "I expect you to fight. You lived through the knife. Now live the rest." The first attempt was agony. The wooden tips dug into the floorboards. Her body swayed, her arms shook. She collapsed back onto the bed, breath hitching with sobs. "I can't," she whispered. Ryan crouched in front of her, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "They left you to die, Aaliyah. Prove them wrong. Every step you take spits in their faces." Something in his words struck deep. With trembling arms, she tried again. This time she took one step, then another. Tears streaked her cheeks. But when she fell into the chair by the fire, a laugh burst from her lips, half sob, half triumph. Over the next weeks, he pushed her harder. In the yard, under a sky hard with winter sun, he steadied her as she wobbled across the snow. When her arms gave out, he lifted her back inside without a word of pity. When her frustration boiled over, he let her rage, then handed the crutches back. "You're not broken," he told her one evening, handing her a mug of broth. "You're forged." It was Takakota, Ryan's old Apache ally, who came one morning with venison slung across his horse. He paused when he saw Aaliyah hobbling in the yard, sweat glistening on her brow. "She fights like a warrior," he said in his accented English, nodding with respect. Aaliyah flushed, clutching the crutches tighter. No one had ever spoken of her with respect, not her kin, not the townsfolk. But here, on this mountain, the words sank into her bones. At night, when her body ached too much to sleep, she lay awake listening to the steady rhythm of Ryan's movements, his boots pacing as he stoked the fire, the soft rasp of his whetstone against steel, the low hum of a hymn he thought no one heard. Once, in a moment of courage, she asked, "Why do they fear you?" Ryan paused, shadows flickering across his scarred face. "Because I've killed men who deserved it, and because I walked away from the world they cling to. That kind of man frightens folks." She studied him, then whispered, "You don't frighten me." His eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat, the air between them felt heavy, charged with something she couldn't name. Then he looked away, muttering, "Rest now." By the time the snow melted into spring, Aaliyah could cross the yard on her crutches, breathless but upright. Each step carved defiance into the earth, each stride a reminder that she was no longer the girl left for dead beneath a wagon. And as Ryan watched her, arms crossed over his chest, a new kind of storm began to gather. Not in the sky, but in the silence between them. Spring seeped slowly into the high country, dripping from icicles, softening the earth, filling the creek with a roar that shook the valley. With each passing day, Aliyah grew stronger. Her world, once narrowed to a bed and fever dreams, widened into the rhythm of life inside Ryan's cabin. The cabin itself was plain but steady. Smoke-darkened rafters stretched low above, shelves lined with jars of dried herbs and roots. A single table stood by the window, scarred by years of use, its surface crowded with tools, bullets, and the Bible Ryan kept close. The hearth was the heart of it all, its fire steady against the mountain's chill. At first, Aliyah moved hesitantly, gripping her crutches, learning where her balance held and where it betrayed her. She swept the floor in short bursts, stirred pots of venison stew, patched Ryan's shirts with crooked stitches. He never mocked her clumsy efforts. When she burned bread, he ate it without a word. When she spilled water, he wiped it up himself. "Why don't you scold me?" she asked one day, cheeks burning with embarrassment. Ryan looked up from the rifle he was cleaning, his voice flat. "You're learning. That's enough." Something about that answer lodged in her chest, warm and unfamiliar. Small kindnesses became threads that stitched their lives together. He always gave her the choicest piece of meat. He cut extra wood so she would never run short when he hunted. He left his bed for her, taking the cot by the door, though she knew his long frame barely fit it. Once, when she stumbled outside and nearly fell into the creek, his arms caught her so quickly she hardly had time to scream. He set her back upright, his hands lingering just long enough for her to feel their steadiness. "You're safe," he said simply. Her heart skipped at those words. Days stretched into weeks. In the mornings, she hobbled into the yard while he split logs, his axe rising and falling with a rhythm that shook the ground. She found herself watching the muscles in his arms flex beneath his shirt, the beads of sweat that glistened on his brow. When he caught her staring, she quickly bent her head, but the heat in her cheeks lingered. At night, the cabin glowed with firelight. Ryan often carved wood into shapes, a bear, a hawk, once a small wolf pup, and left them on the mantel. She asked once who they were for, and his silence was long before he answered. "Used to carve for my daughter. Hands remember what the heart can't forget." The sorrow in his tone pierced her. She reached out, touching the wooden wolf. "She would be proud," she whispered. He didn't reply, but his eyes softened, and for a moment she glimpsed the man buried beneath scars and silence. Slowly, laughter returned to her. The first time it burst from her lips, after she managed to balance long enough to ladle stew without spilling, Ryan's head jerked up as if startled. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. "You sound alive," he said. She realized she was. The town below still whispered cruelly about the crippled fat girl who should have died. But in the cabin, she was not a burden. She was useful, wanted, even cherished in ways unspoken. Each small act of respect from Ryan unraveled the lies her family had bound her with. One night, as rain pattered against the roof, she found the courage to say it. "I thought I was nothing, Ryan. I thought being left behind meant I didn't matter." His gaze met hers, steady and fierce. "They were wrong." Her throat tightened. "And you? What do you see when you look at me?" The silence stretched, filled with the pop of the fire, the drum of rain. Finally his voice came low, rough, almost reluctant. "I see someone stronger than most men I've ever known. Strong enough to walk again, strong enough to make me believe in something I thought I'd buried." Aliyah's tears spilled, but they were not bitter. They were the first tears of hope she had cried in years. The mountain cabin, once a place of exile, had become something else, a home. And in its quiet heart, two broken souls were learning, step by fragile step, what it meant to live again. Summer crept into the Rockies, melting the last of the snow and painting the valley green. For a time, Aaliyah and Ryan lived in an uneasy but tender rhythm. She tended herbs and cooked. He hunted and chopped wood. Their cabin felt like a world apart, safe and steady. But safety in the frontier never lasted. It began with whispers. A trader passing through the valley muttered about soldiers at Fort Carson asking questions. "Looking for a man named Ryan Cutter," he said, glancing nervously at the hulking figure who paid him in pelts. "They say he deserted after the war, that he took up with Apache outlaws." Ryan's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. That night he sat long by the fire, the Bible closed in his lap, his face carved from stone. Aaliyah couldn't hold her tongue. "Is it true? Did you desert?" He looked at her then, eyes shadowed. "I buried too many good men in uniform. When they ordered me to burn Apache camps, women, children, I walked away. That's all they need to brand me a traitor." Her heart ached at the weight in his voice. She had known he carried ghosts, but not their names. "You saved me," she whispered. "That doesn't sound like a traitor." He didn't answer, but the flicker of something softer crossed his face before the silence swallowed him again. Days later, the peace shattered. Riders appeared in the valley, blue coats glinting beneath the sun. A squad of soldiers, led by a stern lieutenant, came to the cabin. Aaliyah, struggling with her crutches, watched from the doorway as Ryan stepped outside, his rifle slung across his back. "Ryan Cutter," the lieutenant barked, "by order of the United States Army, you are under arrest for desertion and aiding raiders in the massacre near Red Butte." Ryan stood tall, saying nothing. "It isn't true!" Aaliyah cried, her voice breaking. "He saved me! The lieutenant cut her off with a sharp gesture. "You'll have your chance to speak, girl. For now, he comes with us." The soldiers seized Ryan, shackling his wrists. Aaliyah lurched forward, nearly stumbling. "Please don't take him. He isn't what they say." But her words fell on deaf ears. Dust rose as the column rode away, leaving her trembling in the cabin's doorway, clutching her crutches like lifelines. That night she lay awake, Ryan's absence pressing like a weight on her chest. Echoes of her family's cruelty clawed at her mind. Useless, burden, fat sow. The same words the world had used to chain her spirit. But now she knew better. She had stood, she had walked, she had lived. And she would not let the only man who had ever believed in her be destroyed by lies. The next morning, she bound her hair, strapped on her boots, and gripped her crutches with hands that no longer trembled. She would go to Fort Carson. She would face the sneers, the whispers, the gaping stares, and she would speak the truth. When Takakota appeared at her door, silent as a shadow, she did not weep. She only asked, "Will you take me there?" The Apache warrior studied her, then nodded once. "He saved me once, now we save him." And so, beneath the blazing sun, Aaliyah began the hardest journey of her life. Not across the mountains, but into the heart of a world that had already judged her body and scorned her worth. She went anyway, each step on her crutches ringing with defiance. Because Ryan Cutter had not left her for dead, and she would not leave him to hang. Fort Carson loomed like a scar against the plains. High wooden palisades, the stars and stripes whipping in the wind, and gallows standing grim against the sky. Aaliyah's heart hammered as Takakota helped her down from his horse. The journey had torn blisters into her palms. Her arms ached from the crutches, but her resolve burned brighter than pain. Inside the fort's crude courtroom, soldiers filled the benches. At the front, Ryan stood shackled, his massive frame straight as ever, his eyes shadowed but unbowed. The lieutenant who had arrested him strutted like a rooster, his voice sharp as he accused Ryan of treason, of consorting with Apache raiders, of abandoning his post. Each word fell like a hammer, the crowd nodding, murmuring, their verdict already sealed. Until a voice rose from the back, unsteady but loud. "I have something to say." Heads turned. Aaliyah stepped forward, crutches striking against the wooden floor. Gasps rippled through the room at the sight of her. Broad, scarred, moving with effort but standing proud. The judge frowned. "State your name." "Aaliyah Carter," she said. "The woman left to die in the mountains. The woman Ryan Cutter saved." Her words cut the room to silence. She told everything. How her family had abandoned her, how Ryan had carried her from the wreck, how he had cut away her crushed legs to save her life, how he had fed her, taught her to walk again. Her voice broke, but she pressed on. "They call him a traitor," she said, her eyes burning as they swept the benches. "But if not for him, I'd be bones in the snow. He didn't abandon me. He refused to abandon anyone, and I will not abandon him now." Takakota rose next, his voice low and firm. He spoke of the day Ryan had pulled him from death on the battlefield, of the blood they had shared, of the respect Ryan had earned from his people. By the time he finished, the courtroom felt different, soldiers shifting uneasily, the judge's gavel hovering in thought. The lieutenant blustered, but his accusations rang hollow against the weight of living testimony. Finally the judge spoke, his voice grave. "The court finds Ryan Cutter not guilty. He is hereby released." The chains fell away. Ryan's gaze found Aaliyah's across the room. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to just the two of them, her trembling on her crutches, him standing free because she had refused to be silent. When he reached her side, she whispered through tears, "I told you I wouldn't leave you." And for the first time in years, the feared mountain man allowed himself a smile. The gallows at Fort Carson faded behind them, replaced by the endless sweep of mountains rising blue against the horizon. Ryan rode beside Takakota, while Aaliyah clutched her crutches across the saddle, her eyes fixed on the high country. Each jolt of the horse hurt, but every mile carried her closer to the only place that felt like home, the cabin. When they arrived, she nearly wept. Neighbors from Ironwood, men and women who once whispered cruel words about her and feared Ryan's name, were already there. They had raised new logs, laid shingles, and built a broader doorway wide enough for her crutches to pass with ease. Smoke rose from a fresh chimney, and laughter carried on the wind. Reverend Matthews clasped Ryan's hand, his eyes shining. "You saved her life. She saved yours. Seems to me the mountain has given us both a home and a lesson." Inside, the cabin smelled of new pine and warm bread. Aaliyah ran her fingers across the smooth wood of the new table, tears slipping free. "They built this for us?" Ryan stood behind her, his presence filling the room. "For you," he said, his voice low. She turned, her heart full. "No, Ryan, for us." The fire crackled, and for the first time since that night in the snow, she felt not like a burden, but like a woman who had carved her place in the world. The wolves and storms had not claimed her. The gallows had not taken him. Together they had survived. But outside, the frontier was still restless. Rumors of railroads, of soldiers, of outlaws. They were storms yet to come. And the question lingered like smoke in the rafters. Would their love be strong enough to withstand what waited beyond the mountain? Every story I share reminds me that love and courage are never shaped by perfect bodies or easy roads, but by the will to rise when the world has cast you aside. Aaliyah and Ryan's fight was not just for survival, but for dignity, hope, and the chance to belong. Where are you listening from tonight? Share your town, your country. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. And if you still believe that love can turn even the darkest winter into light, stay with me. The next tale is waiting just beyond the mountain.